everybody. I am Marina and I'm your host at UNBOSSED. UNBOSSED is a podcast I've created to highlight women with amazing paths of success here in Chicago. Last year, I set out to interview the only 40 female CTOs in the city, and this year I've expanded to female CEOs and women in politics and government in Chicago. I'm excited to share these interviews with you, and I hope you contact me at www.unbossed.io or email me at marina@unbossed.io. Hope to see you soon.
Andrea Zopp joins Cleveland Avenue as managing partner leading the Counsels initiative, investing in and developing minority and women-led entrepreneurs and their companies. She has significant experience in a broad range of areas, including banking, consumer products, retail, regulated industry, human capital, crisis and risk management, and government and community relations. Zopp is currently a member of the board of directors of Relativity and of Empowerment and Inclusion Capital I Corp. She's also chair of the board of trustees at Chicago State University and is a member of the board of directors of the Henry Ford Health System. She has previously served on the boards of Andrew Corporation and Urban Partnership Bank. Zopp has worked in and with numerous global companies and has managed teams located overseas. In her role as the president and chief executive officer of World Business Chicago, the city's economic development organization, she worked closely with the Chicago Counsel Corps, International Chamber of Commerce, and multinational companies to attract foreign direct investment and facilitate company relocation and expansion. She was also responsible for organizing and implementing mayoral international trade delegations. She's also a successful businesswoman and has held executive leadership positions in several Fortune 500 companies, including Sarah Lee, Sears Holding, and Exelon. As the former president and CEO of the Chicago Urban League, she led the nationally recognized organization's focus on expanding economic opportunity in underserved communities. Previously, she served as deputy mayor, chief neighborhood development officer for the city of Chicago. Zopp served in the United States Attorney's Office and was the first woman and African American to serve as the first assistant in the Cook County State Attorney's Office. She has also served on the Chicago Board of Education, the Cook County Health and Hospital System Board, and numerous nonprofit boards. Zopp received her Bachelor of Arts in History and Science from Harvard University and is a graduate of Harvard Law School. Please welcome Andrea Zopp.
Hello, everybody. This is Marina, your podcast host at UNBOSSED. Today with me, I have a very special guest. Andrea Zopp is managing partner at Cleveland Avenue. Thank you for joining me, Andrea.
Thanks, Marina. I'm happy to be with you.
So, like I was saying, I am just amazed and mesmerized and totally starstruck by all the things that you have done. And we'll definitely get your bio in here in the description so that the listeners can also read through the bio. But if you wouldn't mind, I'm going to take you back before we start really talking about business to really your early ages. I know you went to Harvard University for a BS and also Harvard Law School. Do you remember, I'm taking you back to that time, right?
Sure.
What was like to be, a woman of color at Harvard? And even if you can remember, how did you get to Harvard?
Sure. So actually, it's a great story. So I ended up applying to Harvard. I went to an all-girls Catholic high school, and this was back in the early 70s where they were kind of like, yeah, you can go to college, but it's really only to find a husband. It was really kind of how they talked to women about it back then, particularly at an all-girls Catholic high school.
Yes.
So and I was a very strong student, and so I really pretty much had to figure out what schools I wanted to apply to, and I applied to schools in Boston generally because I was I thought it was very liberal, that Massachusetts had a black senator, one of the first, Ed Brooks was his name, and Massachusetts was the only state at the time to go vote for Mondale, who was running for president, a Democrat running for president, and so I was like, okay, this is going to be a liberal state. It'll be great. And so I applied to Harvard. And also Harvard had like a 4-to-1 male-female ratio. And so
Yes.
coming out of an all-girls Catholic high school, I was like, that'll be great. And I knew it was a great school, but I wasn't like Harvard starstruck like a lot of people. But I was fortunate. I got in and I went and I learned a few things. First of all, Massachusetts, the state is liberal. Boston was like the most racist place on the planet
Wow.
at the time. It was like living in Selma, Alabama.
Wow.
When I got there, they had just had court-ordered busing to integrate their schools, and they were literally stoning people, white crowds of angry white people throwing stones at buses with little black kindergartners in the window. It was horrifying. And Boston was just a very racist city. They killed, while I was in school there, they killed a black guy, a prosecutor, walking through across the main plaza downtown. It'd be like kind of walking across Daly Plaza. He ran into a group of white people, and they beat him to death with a flag. So, I mean, it was just a horrible. Boston was Cambridge was great. Harvard was good, very diverse overall. Not tons of black people, but they were getting more, but not nowhere near where it is today. And just overall had a lot of work to do. The law school really had only had 2 black professors and only 1 woman professor. And one of the black professors was a professor named Derek Bell, left the law school while I was there because he said, this is such a horrible place for black people. We were like, wait a minute, but you can't leave us here. So you really had to, it was kind of like surviving. And the upside was education was great. The student body, they were literally from all over the country, and you learned a lot. But it was not a warm and fuzzy environment for people of color or for women. It has dramatically improved now. They have a number of women. They've had 2 women deans at the law school. They have a number of women and people of color on the faculty. They've dramatically increased the diversity of the faculty of the college. So it has improved, but it was a tough time.
Yeah. Where are you from originally?
I'm from upstate New York, Rochester. I grew up in Rochester, New York,
New
on the
York.
East Coast.
I've been there. Yeah.
Yeah, hopefully not in winter. It snows there a lot.
Yes.
But I came to Chicago after law school.
Did you always have this idea of going to an Ivy League school, or how did that ambition come to you?
I wasn't Ivy League school. I wanted to go to a good school.
Good
So
school.
I applied to schools that were not necessarily. I didn't apply to all Ivy League schools. In fact, I think Harvard's probably the only Ivy League school I applied to. I applied to Tufts, Boston University, Northwestern. So I applied to. I thought I could get into a good school. I wanted to go to the best school I could get into, and that ended up being Harvard. But yeah, I didn't. I wish I didn't, because my parents, and this is a kind of a older black people thing, like they never tell you stuff. Like, both my parents went to HBCUs. Yeah. Neither of my parents strongly encouraged me to go to an HBCU, which I really regret. So I didn't. Like, my mother and her entire family all went to Hampton University, like all of them, her sister, my cousins. And it wasn't until after I had already applied and gotten into Harvard that she was like, oh, you probably should have thought about applying to Hampton. Now, if I'd gotten into Harvard and Hampton, I probably still would have gone to Harvard, but I didn't even think about it. I didn't think about Howard. It just wasn't top of mind for me. And I regret that. Like, I would have strongly considered Spelman, I think, as well. But anyway, I worked out okay. I'm not complaining. So.
Yeah, absolutely. So you started with history and science, right? And then went to law school. Did you always knew you wanted to at least start as a law student? You end up as a law student, or did you find your way into law school once you were there?
Definitely found my way there. I actually went to college. I was going to be I was pre-med.
Okay.
Really loved biology when I was in in high school, and so I thought this will be great. I can and wanted to help people, but it turns out I really was not that good at math, and I really hated chemistry. So, and also turns out I don't really like the sight of blood, all that much
Yeah.
either. So I don't know what I was thinking. And so I was trying to, but I ended up in history and science because had been taking some science courses and liked them. It was the math I didn't love all that much, particularly like biology and the physical sciences. Like I love physics because I love understanding how things work. And
Yeah.
like biology is really basically like how the body works, and physics is basically how like the physical world works. And so history of science, but I also loved history. And the Harvard had a department that was combined history and science. It was the history of science department. And so, and it was an honors department. So I ended up majoring there. And then I spent a summer in Washington working for my congressman. And that's really when I decided that I wanted to go to law school because they were passing all these laws. And I realized that like half the time, the people in Congress didn't know what the laws did, much less the human beings that the laws were going to impact. And I realized that that's what lawyers do is really, the lawyers really interpret the law for people. And so
Yes.
I ended up thinking about law school, which I should have thought of earlier. My father was a lawyer and in fact was
Nice.
the first Black judge on the bench in Rochester.
Wow.
But of course, when you're in high school, your
You
goal is
think
to like
about that.
not, no, I'm trying not to be my dad. Love my
Not,
dad. I was trying not to be him.
yeah.
Turns out I actually am. It turned out I'm exactly him. So I ended up going to law school and I loved it. I mean, I was really one of those weird geeky people. My very first day at law school,
Yeah.
I loved it.
Give
You
me a
need to,
second. Sorry.
no problem.
Let me grab her. Great. So we were saying that we try not to be like our parents, and then at the
Right.
end we turn out just like them.
Right. I turned out to be, and interesting. My mother actually worked in human resources, and as you know, I actually led a human resources
Yes.
function well. So I actually have officially become both of my parents. As it turns out, is something I'm very proud of. But you know, when you're coming out of high school, you're like, absolutely not. I'm gonna be me. So, but I went to law school, and it turns out I loved law
Love
school.
it.
Like the very
Nice.
first day, reading court cases and applying law to the facts, I was like, this is what I was meant to do. So it worked out
Amazing.
okay.
So after law school, did you actually, I don't know if I can see this, but did you actually practice as a lawyer in the city here in Illinois?
I did. So I didn't start practicing. I left from law school. I came to Chicago. I had a clerkship with a judge. So it's basically you help the judge research and write opinions. So I had a clerkship with a federal judge, a gentleman named George Layton, who was a civil rights titan here in Chicago. He did incredible work, was an amazing lawyer, had been on the state court bench and the state court trial court bench and then the appellate court bench, and then he moved to the federal bench. And really, he represented Dr. King. He was amazing. I didn't know any of that. I just knew he was African American judge on the federal bench here. So I applied and I got the job. And it was a 2-year job. And I thought, and by the way, for your listeners who are in Chicago, they may recognize the name Layton, George Layton, because they've named the criminal courts building after him.
Yes.
So it's the Layton Criminal Courts building. So he was amazing. But I came and I worked for him as a 2-year job, and I'd never been to Chicago. And I thought, well, it's 2 years. If I don't like it, I can leave. And that was 40 years ago. So I kind of liked it okay.
Chicago will
And
do that to you. It feels like it's a place
yeah,
where you come here to try it out and then you
right.
stay for longer than you're meant to.
Right, and then you're like, "Wow," but I loved the city. It
Yeah.
really was for me. It was all the great things that New York has, and the ability to go around, and great music and food and art, and but it doesn't have all the hassles of New York,
Yes.
and so I really loved it here. So I worked for the judge for 2 years, and then I went to the U.S. Attorney's Office. So then I was a prosecutor for both for the U.S. Attorney's Office and then the State's Attorney's Office. And then I went to private practice. So I did a few other things before I went to work for a law firm.
Tell us, perhaps, like, as a Black woman, you were probably like, there were not many of you, like you said, in your class. And then probably even less once you got into the job. I'm not gonna put words in your mouth, but like, what was the experience like then? And then perhaps what are the changes that you're seeing now, and the differences, especially in Chicago?
Yeah. So, for me, in fact, one of the reasons I ended up going to the U.S. Attorney's Office, because I liked criminal law, and in fact, was thought after my clerkship I would do criminal defense work. But I saw my judge always let us come to the courtroom, and what I saw was that the prosecutors had all the power. They decided who got charged, they decided what the evidence was, what the charges were, and then they decided. At the time, they had a lot of say in the sentencing. And there weren't, and the defense lawyers really important, but they were very reactive, right? They had to react to what the prosecutors were doing, and there were very few women and very few people of color in the U.S. Attorney's Office at the time, and I thought I could be more impactful as a Black woman with a voice in the U.S. Attorney's Office, and so I ended up going there, and I had, I know because I know this is important to you and the
Yes.
podcast. I had help from a woman who's been my mentor now since that time, who was an African American woman who's in the U.S. Attorney's Office at the time. She called me. I had applied, and she called me out of the blue. Didn't know her, and she called me. And she said, "You don't know me. My name's Ann, but you've applied for a job at the U.S. Attorney's Office. You're going to get an interview, and I need to talk to you before you have your interview." And so we went and we had lunch, and she said, "You're going to get an interview. They're going to ask you these questions." And she told me a series of questions that were questions I would have expected. And then she told me, and then you're going to give these answers. And the answers were not the answers that I as a woman of color, would naturally have given, and it wasn't like a code so much, but it was a little bit like a code, right? And so she helped me. And when I got to the interview, I got asked certain questions and I gave certain answers and I got a job. And that probably wouldn't have happened if she hadn't helped me. And I literally did not know her at all before she called me. And she was one of, I think, 2 or 3 Black women in the office maybe 2 at the time. It's that she's been a mentor the whole time, but it taught me that lesson about when you walk into a space, your job is to keep the door open and to stick your hand out and pull other people through that door.
Wow.
And so. And so I did do that. I helped the office hire several other women of color. And it was challenging. It was challenging to be a woman. It was challenging to be a person of color. There were a lot of people who were incredibly supportive. It was amazing. I learned how to be a really good, high integrity lawyer in that office. And I had a lot of mentors, most of whom didn't look like me, who've been friends of mine for a really long time. So, but there were, you'd go into the courtroom and people would think you're the court reporter.
Yes.
You explain to them, no, I'm the lawyer for the government.
Yes.
Sometimes the law enforcement agents were a little challenging. You'd have to explain to them, that no, really, you do have to do what I say because I'm the prosecutor. So it was, mostly minor things. I never had anything horrible happen. And I was never, actively demeaned, but, it's just challenges that you have to face that majority population didn't have to face.
Yeah.
I think it's changed, particularly for women. There are a lot more women now. There's still not enough in my view, and there are more people of color, but there's still not enough. And I think I mentioned to you before we started recording that there are, or actually I was mentioning to somebody else, sorry, but that there's never been a person of color or a woman U.S. attorney in Chicago, in the U.S. Attorney's Office here in Chicago, which in my view is outrageous.
Still today.
Ever. It's only ever been white men. Which is incredible. I think we're probably the only major urban area to not have a woman or person of color lead that office, and that's really bothers me. But hopefully that will change. But we still, there's no African Americans on the appellate court bench now, in the federal appellate court bench. President Biden just nominated an African American woman to go on to the bench, which will be amazing. But just the idea that on that whole court, there's only one, there's not, and there's actually no African Americans, period. And that's, again, kind of outrageous. The court
Yeah.
decides cases from 3 different states. So we still have a lot of, there's been a lot of improvement, but in the legal profession, there's still a lot of work to be
Work to
done.
do. Absolutely.
Most of the large law firms still have very few women and very few, they're probably about 20-30% women, and a fraction of that people of color, and very, very few people of color or women in leadership roles, managing partner,
Yes.
managing departments. And that's just unfortunate. We just have a lot of work to do
Yes.
in the field.
In those moments when you felt perhaps, and maybe I'll speak for myself, but like being in tech, a woman in tech, sometimes, I felt alone, I felt discouraged. What was that thing, or those moments of challenges for you? What was the thing that kept you going? What was your purpose and mission that you were aiming at, perhaps, or whatever that spark was that kept you going and did not let you quit, if you will?
Yeah, I think first of all, I've always loved the practice of. I love the law. I think we live, in a country. It's not perfect, but we do have a rule of law. We do have a justice system. It doesn't always work perfectly, but it does work in amazing ways. And so I've loved being able to be a part of that and to be able to influence it from the perspective of women of color. But I've also been driven by excellence. I am driven by the job and doing the job well. And I know that I'm very good at what I do. And so generally I just kind of power through, when the person thinks you're the court reporter, you explain to them, no, not the court reporter, and then you do a really amazing job as the lawyer. And oftentimes, people underestimate you when you're a
Yes.
woman and a person of color. They assume you're there because somehow you got in because of diversity or not because you're competent, and that can work to your advantage because oftentimes they let their guard down, they don't do their good job, and then when you kind of really do what you do and do it well, you either are able to achieve stuff because they're not doing their best because they assumed you weren't going to be that good, or oftentimes you get a lot of credit because people are surprised. They're like, "Oh my God, you're actually smart." You're like, "Yeah, I am amazing," and so you get that benefit, you get that extra bump because they're so amazed that you're actually competent that you now have actually impressed them. And so I use people underestimating me to my advantage. I have used people underestimating me to my advantage throughout my career. I don't try not to waste time being angry.
Got it.
It doesn't accomplish anything. And that's really more about them. It's their problem, not
Yes.
my
Absolutely. You've obviously had a lot of success, like you were saying, moving upwards in the ladder, and it sounds like in law or in I want to say like in the law industry, whether it's for public service or for private law firms, there is somewhat of an ascension problem where perhaps there may be a lot of women coming in, and then it is harder to get up in the ranks. Have you thought about what has been your formula of success? Let me give me a second. Let me
Okay. The baby.
I know. There it goes. Have you thought about what has been that formula of success, or some of tricks that you can give other women to say, like, how do you position yourself for the next level and continue that progress and that ascension so that you don't get stagnant into the role you're at?
Yeah, I would say a couple things. I say, first of all, I circle back to excellence. Nothing, I can't remember who said this, might have been Oprah, but, nothing beats racism or sexism or any ism than performance, right? Over performance. So you can't, and if you're not performing, it's really hard to, you now have to deal with those biases, but you have to deal with the fact that you're not performing. So I tell everybody, focus first and foremost on doing your job really well. So that's number one. And then number two, I think it's also then about stepping up and being willing to do more. You just have to not necessarily, and by more I mean, you know, volunteer to take on that case that other people don't really want to do because it's hard. Or like when I was at the U.S. Attorney's Office, I did a lot of drug cases because they weren't cool. In the U.S. Attorney's Office, everybody wants to do public corruption cases, and just fine. But for me, I was like, well, drugs are really hurting my community. So I'm very happy to not, and I don't want to prosecute low-level drug users. I want to prosecute the people that aren't using the drugs but are profiting off of them. And so I took those cases. But there's all kinds of volunteer to do things, and volunteer to do things that will stretch you. Right, that will push you to learn skills and experiences that you might not otherwise have. And then the last thing is, don't be afraid to take some risks. I tell everybody to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. You have to be willing to say, I'm willing to take that stretch opportunity, or I'm willing to lead that effort. Even if you're not 100% certain that you're going to be, that every single thing. Too often as women, we want to make sure that we can do every single thing perfectly. And as opposed to, guys will take stuff where they can't do any of it perfectly, but they just figure, I'll figure it out on the way. And so we have to be able to kind of go, what do people do? I may not know everything, but I know a lot, and I'll figure out the other pieces. And sometimes when you do that, you might make a mistake or two. That's okay. Because if you don't push yourself, it's hard to grow. And when you do those things, you tend to be seen, and oftentimes seen in spaces and in ways that you are unexpected. And that's, I think, when opportunity comes.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for that. That was very helpful. I'm going to ask a cliche follow-up question a little bit, just because you did say that we should ask for more. And I think what comes up for a lot of women is like, I have a family, and I also am trying to manage my career, and I'm also trying to take care of other people around me and my community, because we do have that effect. What has been your approach to that work-life / other balance? And what have you learned from perhaps your time as a professional?
Yeah, I'd say, so first of all, I think, you have to start with the thing, accepting that life's not fair, right? That, it's the pathways are going to be easier sometimes for others than it is for you, because you're a woman or you're a woman of color. We live in a world where there's still a lot of systemic racism. Oftentimes, women of color aren't going to get that that support. That's not always the case, because I've had a lot, and I've had a lot of support, mentoring, and sponsorship from majority people. So I'm not saying it's not there, but if you spend a lot of time thinking like, well, Joe didn't have to do this, then you just, it's not the right focus. The second thing is then know kind of where you are in your life and what things are most important for you, or what you can and cannot balance.
Yeah,
right?
give me an example.
Right, where there were times like where my family was, this is it. Right now, I can only do this. I really can't volunteer for these 4 other things right this minute. Because I've got 2 babies at home, or three babies at home, or because I have to get home. I have to get home at a particular time, and you just have to. And so you have to kind of know where you're at, and then and try and balance it. But then you may have to do some extra things depending on what your job is and what you're trying to achieve. You may have to do some extra things, and I'll give you an example. When I left the state's attorney's office, I went into private practice, and I went to a firm that I made sure there were women partners there, because I wanted to make partner, and they had kids, because I had 3 little, at that point I had 3 children under the age of 4.
Wow.
Or maybe under the age of 4. And so I wanted to be able to still be a partner. And it turns out there were women partners there who had made partner where they had kids, but they were all crazy. I mean, they all were. And here's what you learned how to do. I would go to work, my regular work hours. I would come home at a reasonable time, 5:36. I would be with my kids, help them with their homework, cook for them, bathe them, get them to bed. And then I would work until noon or two, 1 or 2. Not every night, not every day, but if I had a project or I had something I had to get done. And then I would do that because that's what I had to do to manage my family. And so I think the key here is, know what your priorities were. My family, my faith and my family have always been my priorities.
Mm.
All but I care a lot about my career and my profession, and so I've balanced it, and it hasn't always worked out perfectly. One year I was working when I was working for the firm. No, I was working for Sarah Lee, and I had to go to London to do some interviews. And my son has a little bit of has asthma, and he was a baby. He was like 3, I think, at the time, and he maybe even 2. Anyway, he was having like a pre-asthma attack. He wasn't like all the way there. And he was wheezing, and we had treatment for him. So I give him my husband. I'm like, give him the treatment. He sounds like I think he's going to be okay. It's fine. I fly to London. I call home. I'm like, okay, how's everybody? And he's like, oh, everybody's fine. And I'm like, how's Willow? He's like, he's fine. I'm like, well, and there's noise in the background. I'm like, what's that noise in the background? He's like, well, we're in the hospital. Will got admitted to the
Oh,
ICU because he was breathing, and it turned out he was fine, and it was
yeah,
everything was fine. But I'm in London. My baby's in the hospital. I felt pretty bad. But it turned out he was fine. His father took care of him, and stuff like that could
yeah,
happen, right? It's not always going to go perfectly. You can't. You have to try not to beat yourself up too much. But it does take sacrifice.
yeah,
It is everybody who has succeeded. Everybody has worked their butts off.
yeah,
You're working your butt off. I mean,
yes.
you've got 3. No, but you are. You have 3 kids. You have a baby. You're doing a podcast. You're working really hard
Yes,
to be accomplished. It's not always pretty, right?
it's
And
not.
but that
In fact,
doesn't
my
mean
baby
it's not
is
worth
crying right now,
it.
and
And
daddy's taking care of
like everybody who has children at home has had that, and since in this last year, I think this is one of the good things about the
Yes,
pandemic. But since this last year, everybody's had that really bad incident with their kid on
yeah,
camera, right
yeah,
in front of other people, where your child has a meltdown in the middle of the conference call. Yeah, it's happened, and it's made everybody a little bit more human and help people to understand that
absolutely.
it's not always going to be perfect,
Yes,
but we all are doing. You do the best you can. The key is to have some core values so
yes.
that you can center around everything else around it. If you don't have those core values, if you're not clear on what's
And
important to
on
you,
priorities,
then
yes.
everything's pulling at you, and you're not as centered as you need to be.
Absolutely. Great. I feel conflicted about asking women to talk too much about their women experience. At the end of the day, you are an extremely accomplished and really smart professional, and I would love to talk about what that's like. And I know that you had a race. I don't know if it was quite recent, I would say. You ran for US Senate.
Yeah.
I would love to hear a little bit of that experience. How was that for you? When did you decide to do that? And how was that experience for you?
Yeah, so I decided to run. I had been running the Chicago Urban League, which is a non-for-profit that focuses on strengthening the African American community, and we do workforce development and work with entrepreneurs and students to help them be successful in school. And I've been doing that for about 5 years, and the race for Senate was coming up, and it was clear that Mark Kirk, who was the Republican senator, was going to be vulnerable. So the race really was going to be the Democratic race. And I just felt that Tammy Duckworth, who's now Senator Duckworth, at the time, well, she had been in Congress at that point. She had just finished, just got elected to her second term. But she had not really been focusing on the issues that were impacting the people that I had been working with.
Yeah.
She wasn't focusing on gun violence or job training or student debt, any of the issues any of the issues that really were impacting my community. And I just felt like if no one got in the race, then an alternative candidate didn't get in the race, those issues would not be discussed. And it was just too important. And so that's why I got in the race. And it was obviously an uphill battle. Senator Duckworth is a war hero. She's a woman of color. She's a mother. And so I think she brought an awful lot to the table. She was supported by the Democratic Party, but I really wanted to make sure that these issues were elevated. And so that's what I did. And it was probably one of the hardest things I've ever done.
Wow.
Mostly because it's 24/7. Like there's no day when you're running for office, there's no days off, right? Because you're always fundraising or going to events, and also because you have to raise a lot of money. I raised almost $3 million from basically June to March, and that's literally just getting on the phone and calling people and begging them for money. And I was good doing it for my not-for-profit, but I was not as good at doing it for myself. So that was hard.
Interesting. What do you think that was?
Because I think it's just hard to ask for money for yourself, right? I mean, literally, when you're running for office, you are literally selling yourself,
yes.
Right? You are, and I'm good at doing the work, but I'm not good at singing my own praises. Like I'm so fabulous, and that's really what you have to do. I'm so fabulous. Give me $2,000. And so it was just hard for me. I got better at. I got pretty good at it, but it was hard. And I probably spent of the time I was running, probably 70% of my time asking for money or going to fundraisers or speaking to people at fundraisers. So that was the hard part. The good part was I traveled the state and talked to people everywhere about the issues. And there are lots of amazing people, great people who care, right? Who care about the quality of their kids' schools, about their children's ability to build a life that's better than theirs, about their ability to pay for good schools for their students, about violence, and that's really, and they're active. That our democratic system, it seems like it's out of whack, and but there are people who are really engaged, and I got to meet people all over the state. We have a really big state. People don't often realize how big Illinois is. It's very, very long.
Especially in
Illinois,
the South.
Right, you drive. The climate changes. You drive, and then you get out of your car, and everybody there speaks with a drawl. So you really are. Southern Illinois is really Southern Illinois, and if you and wonderful people, whose issues are different than those, obviously, from the urban perspective, but as I said, in many ways are the same issues. They're worried about jobs. They're worried about being able to recruit companies there so that they can have jobs. They're worried about the quality of their schools. So in many ways very similar and wonderful people, but it's a little bit of a different economy and therefore a different environment. So, but it was great, and I'm really glad I did it.
If you had to do something different looking back, is there something that you would have thought about that you would do differently?
No, I don't. No, I don't think so. I mean, I've been really, really fortunate. I have loved every job that I've had. I didn't love practicing law in a big law firm just because I didn't love civil litigation as much, but I learned a lot, and my firm was amazing. I worked at a firm at the time, it was called Sun and Shine Nathan Rosenthal. It's now called Denton's. I had great partners who were really supportive. I got access to really interesting work. It wasn't my favorite. Civil litigation takes a long time, and it's a lot of paperwork, and it takes you a long time to get to resolution. It can cost your clients a lot of money. And that's ultimately how I ended up going in-house and working as a corporate lawyer for companies, because I felt like if I was working with the client, I could help them avoid the issues that they were getting sued over and spending a lot of money on to get sued. And I really, and again, I like learning how things work and operate. And so I really loved being in operating companies. But I've loved every job that I've had. I've learned a lot. I haven't always done them brilliantly, but I've tried. And so I know there's really not much that I would do differently.
Have you thought about running again?
Yeah, no, I probably won't do that again. But I learned a lot, and I'm glad I did it, but I definitely don't think I'm meant to be a politician. I'm meant to be the worker bee behind the scenes.
Well, that's a good thing to know about oneself, is also like, what role do we want to play in society and in our jobs? So that's really good. All right, let's talk about the fund. I know you're currently at let me get my thing straight here. You're currently at Cleveland Avenue as a managing partner. You're also a board member, member of board of directors at Relativity, a great Chicago company, and at Empowerment and Inclusion Capital. What perhaps like we can talk about like how are these roles now gotten it to you creating a fund, and then we can talk about your fund and what you're doing there.
Yeah. So Cleveland Avenue is a investment venture capital investment firm started by a gentleman named Don Thompson and his wife Liz Thompson. Don was the first African American CEO at McDonald's, worked his way up through McDonald's, was an executive there, and Liz was a business person in her own right in a variety of settings, and they came together and started this firm. Amazing people, and so it's a real privilege to work with them. But for me, the transition to come here really was natural for the 10 years really preceding. So from my time at the Urban League, I've really been working on expanding economic opportunities. And that's really what we did at the Urban League. Then I was in the mayor's office as a deputy mayor for neighborhood development and community engagement. And that was really about helping the mayor plan and be strategic around community-based investments and helping the communities engage and value and use those investments to their advantage and help to leverage those investments. So did that, and then I was running the city's economic development organization, Rural Business Chicago, which was helping to recruit companies here to create jobs, and then also working with small businesses to help them grow. So I've been working in that space for economic opportunity for a long time. Don and Liz, and Don in particular, wanted to start a fund to focus on minority, Black, Latinx, and women-led companies, because those entrepreneurs typically do not get the same level of access to capital. They are significantly underfunded compared to majority companies. Their capital needs typically tend to be unmet by about 76% compared to a much lower percentage for majority companies. And so that's why he started the fund. He was able to raise close to $71 million to seed the fund. And I've known Don and Liz for a long time, so he and I were talking about what he was doing, and I thought, this is absolutely the right fit for me, because it's working with small businesses and entrepreneurs and actually having the resources to help them grow. And really, and the focus is Chicago. We're not limited to Chicago, but that's our focus. And the objective really is to support and grow companies that will be located and hire from the South communities on the South and West sides, and build economic capacity, jobs, and wealth in those communities. And so that's, for me, exactly what I've been doing in previously, but now doing it at a great company and with the resources to invest in the businesses.
Nice. What are briefly, like, for people that don't know how funds work, what is the business side of funds? Like, there are some funds that are private, there are some funds that raise private money, there are some funds that have public money. And then what is the return of a fund, and how do you monetize, the fund itself?
Right. So they're typically, the main kinds are, there's private equity and then venture capital. Private equity, typically they go in and they buy a majority interest in the company and they run it. And they typically they do that with companies that are undervalued for some reason, like that. And in the private equity team then either reorganizes or adds new lines and figures out a way to unlock the value, and then monetizes it down the road. Venture capital is really about providing capital to businesses so that the business can then use that money and grow. So they invest in businesses that are growing, are expanding, and then the goal then is to have those companies grow, and then typically they either go public and then you get your money back that way, or they get bought by another company, you get your money back that way. So you have something that happens, but you're really funding a company's growth, and but you typically you don't have a majority ownership of the company, but you have you invest, you give, and it's equity capital. Typically, sometimes it's loans that can be converted into equity capital, but you're getting a piece of a percentage of ownership interest in the business.
Have you thought about the model of investing in Black communities in Chicago? Like, is that still the model for the fund? And what have you noticed that is different than perhaps other non-minority led businesses?
I think really couple things. First of all, because we're a diverse but minority led company, I think we don't have some of the unconscious biases that majority investors have. Around competency or ability, and again, it's unconscious bias, not conscious bias, but I think there's a reason why Black and Latinx business owners and women, oftentimes people don't want this, and I said this is risk. This is risk capital. It doesn't always work, and so it means you're taking a risk on an entrepreneur, and often I think it's harder for Black companies. So I think, first of all, we come at it, we eliminate that, right? We don't, our perspective is, you got a good idea and it seems to make sense. I don't care, I'm not assuming, there's no assumption that perhaps you can't execute on your plan. So that helps. And I think for us, what the goal is, really what happens is we're investing not in seed stage. So we're not investing in ideas. There are investors who invest in the idea. We're investing in companies that already have revenue and have a track record. And really what oftentimes what happens is you get a good idea, you get a little bit of money from either from your family or your friends, and you start getting there, and then you really need to grow. You need money to expand, to buy more product, or to expand your line, or to expand your distribution, or to do your marketing, or to add staff. and you can't get that money. And what we're trying to do is to give companies that are ready to grow the capital that they need to then grow. The idea then is that they can then grow, and then they'll be able to, and then also to provide some support, some guidance. One of the Cleveland Avenue's models is, we have a lot of talent here. We have marketing expertise, we have distribution expertise, we have finance expertise, we have HR expertise, and we can help you deploy that capital and give you counsel and advice. So we also provide some support and training, because oftentimes entrepreneurs of color, majority of entrepreneurs oftentimes get that from their network, from their family network, from friends, and entrepreneurs of color oftentimes don't have that same kind of network. We help to provide it as well.
Nice. And I am hearing also, like, maybe it's implicit, but I am hearing that your fund would like to maintain ownership within the Black likeness and women-led community. So this is really important, where sometimes if a fund takes over, then it becomes all of a sudden a white owned company. Versus in this case, we're really trying to maintain and get and keep the capital, the wealth within those communities.
Well, within the entrepreneurs, right? So we're not taking an ownership interest. We're taking an interest, but you're trying to keep the company in the hands of the entrepreneur, at least until they move to a monetization event. And so when they do, they can then keep the bulk of the benefit of that event, and then build wealth within themselves. Go start another company.
Right. So this fund is called Cast US Fund.
Yep. Cast Us. It stands for Cleveland Avenue State Treasurer, because our lead investor is the State Treasurer Mike Farrick's office. Through his investment lead is a gentleman named Rodrigo Garcia, who's been a tremendous partner. And really was part of, with Don Thompson, our CEO, really the leading voice behind creating the fund in the first place. We're also, MacArthur Foundation is an investor, Bank of America, BMO, Harris Bank, and then a number of family foundations. So what's great about this fund is it truly is a public-private partnership, all investing in the fund. So yeah, it's called Cast Us. We have access to it on our Cleveland Avenue website. If you have a company, one of your listeners has a company that they're looking for capital, our target, as I said, our targets are Black, Latinx, and women founders, primarily in Chicago, although we're not limited to Chicago. And you can go to the website, and there's a form you can, an interest inquiry form that you can fill out, and we'll take a look at it and get back to you to see if you're a good fit for investment from the fund.
Amazing. Believe it or not, we are at the end
out of time. Oh no, that went super fast.
It goes super fast, but we have a few outros questions that are just for fun.
Yeah.
That we do is like a cheeky thing that I do on my podcast here. So if you don't mind, I'm gonna step right into those. What is maybe one thing that the audience doesn't know about you and you would like to share?
Well, let's see. I think one thing is I'm an animal lover. I have we've always had animals. We currently have 2 dogs and 4 cats.
Wow.
So we have a house full. So that's one thing people might not know.
I love it. Perfect. What is a book you have gifted the most, or a resource that you like to share, whether it's with your peers or with your employees?
The 2 books that I've gifted or recommended the most one I've recommended a lot is The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander, which is a book that talks about the criminal justice system and talks about how it has in many ways been built to create a model of over-incarceration of people of color. And then the other book is Warmth of Other Suns by Isabel Wilkerson, which is about the Great Migration of African Americans from the South into cities in the North. And it's told from a she does kind of not historical fiction, but she tells history from the perspective of individuals. So she literally tells the story of several families that came from the South to different communities. One is Chicago, one is New York, and the other is California. So.
Wow. Perfect. Thank you. What is a book you would write?
I love mysteries, and I love science fiction. I'm not great at imagining science fiction, so I probably couldn't write a good science fiction novel. I might be able to write a murder mystery just from my background in the criminal justice system. So I worked with Scott Turow, so I at least I have some experience
do you have a title in mind of what that could be?
I don't have a title in mind. I haven't quite figured that out.
Perfect. Okay, so if we had to talk about one message here, and I would love for you to highlight the need to invest, perhaps the need to invest into minority communities here in Chicago. What is important looking at the future? Like one message that you would leave here looking at the future?
Yeah, I'd say for me, I think the message is, and really what I've been working and passionate about is really, that there's a lot of opportunity in our city and in our country. The challenge has been that it has been unequally shared, and so I think entrepreneurship and supporting entrepreneurs is really about expanding their access to opportunity so that they can then expand access to opportunity, whether it's through jobs or through their products, to others. And so I think, for me, the message really is that I think if we focus on that and we focus on trying to do that in a way that is more equitable, we can really live up to the city's potential. The city's such a great city. There's so much going on here, and there is so much opportunity. So I think I think all of us have either because we're entrepreneurs or because of in our work environment have that opportunity. And whether that is you're an entrepreneur, whether that is you can counsel or mentor somebody else and help them achieve an opportunity, whether it is you can hire somebody and help them achieve that opportunity. I think it's really about finding ways to share the wealth and encourage the sharing of the wealth. Because I think if we can all do that, it's better for the city, it's better for our community, it's better for our families, and we'll all feel better. So I think that's really what I think. Kind of my mission has been in life as a professional, and I hope others will think about trying to find ways to do.
That was beautiful. Thank you so much, Andrea, for being on Boss, the podcast. I hope you come back and we can talk this about a lot more. But for now, fun. Thank you. I wish you a good week.
Thank you. Thank you, Marina. I really enjoyed it. Thanks.
Perfect. Bye.
Bye. Take care.